Welcome to Season 2 of Around and Around the OCD Circle podcast. My name is Elizabeth, and I have been living with obsessive compulsive disorder for over 60 years. I am not a therapist or a medical professional. Each week, I will document my struggles and successes while having OCD. I will also speak with ordinary people, just like yourself, from around the globe, who have graciously agreed to share their OCD stories with you. I feel certain you will relate to some or all of their experiences. If at any time you feel like hurting yourself or ending your life, please call the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline by dialing 988 if you are in the United States. It is open 24 hours a day, and you will be connected with the nearest crisis center to receive immediate counseling and local mental health referrals. Now, on to today's episode. Welcome to Around and Around the OCD Circle. In today's conversation, Zachary Gittelman, a 29-year-old living in Manhattan, shares his experience with Pure O, a form of OCD marked by distressing thoughts or obsessions without visible compulsions. His OCD symptoms became pronounced in his early 20s after moving away from his twin brother, with his obsessions often involving self-harm thoughts. Through years of therapy, including ERP, also called exposure response therapy, Zachary has learned to manage his OCD and now helps others via his website, themangohealth.com, which provides OCD resources and self-guided ERP tools. Zachary's website and email addresses can be found in the show notes below. Let's take a listen to this fascinating conversation. Well, good morning, Zach. How are you doing today?
Good. Thanks for having me, Beth. Appreciate it.
You're very welcome. I haven't really talked to you much, so this is all new to me as well. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself to the listeners and just give us a little bit about yourself, maybe where you live, what you do, things like that?
Yeah. So I'm in New York City now, in Manhattan. I grew up in Miami, Florida, and I moved around quite a bit in my 20s. Went to school in Michigan, and then worked at Johns Hopkins at their applied physics lab, and then came up to New York for grad school here. And I suppose my background is in computer science, so I'm an engineer, and I'm currently working on a couple of things to help people with OCD. Yeah,
That's awesome. So you yourself have OCD, right?
Yep.
Which is great that you know what it's like. So do you want to tell us a little bit about maybe when it first started and some of the things?
So I actually have an identical twin brother, and so growing up, we always did everything together and even went to school together. And the first time apart was when I was right after school. I was in Maryland. I was in Baltimore. And I started to, I guess in my mind at the time, overthink things and was very worried about my career and whether it was going in the direction that I wanted. I think it was probably due to, just being in a new place, a new job, trying to make new friends. And this went on for, I think, the better part of about a year. So I was about 22, 23. I'm currently 29. And after about a year and a half living there, it got to the point where I was just overthinking to the point where I just could not be productive. and it led me to kind of maybe an old term, but like rage quit and go to Patagonia and figure out what I wanted to do with my life. But yeah, I had a pretty hard time, sort of, even when I was traveling, and I think the philosophy is sort of wherever you go, there you are. Certainly, the OCD is not going to leave you no matter where you are. So the overthinking didn't really stop, and it got to a point where I had uh, 2 panic attacks, and they were, I think, some of the most like frightening moments of my life, because my biggest fears were just like at the forefront of my mind. Um, and I can tell you a little bit later, but my fears largely had to do with um, my career, but then sort of progressed into like my life, and also we talk about self-harm as well, subtype. Um, so I was scared to the point where I had to go home, and started to go into therapy because I thought, I don't know, there must be something wrong with me. And it took the better part of about 3 years. There was so many ups and downs before it was the fourth therapist I saw that actually diagnosed me with OCD. Um, and the rest just kept saying I have anxiety and I'm depressed, which just, yeah, maybe were side effects, but they weren't diagnosing the actual issue, which is that I had OCD.
Was it like
So,
talk therapy more?
yeah, it was. And I did some CBT as well, which, of course, if you have OCD, you might know that trying to kind of fight it makes it even worse. So that also didn't necessarily work for me. It took, yeah, until um, that fourth therapist to finally tell me, like, no, you have uh, pretty distinct symptoms of OCD. So
Mm-hmm.
that really unlocked a lot for me and helped me in my journey.
I mean, that wasn't that long ago. That's just incredible that you had to see 4 people before you got someone who knew the issues. Like, just blows my mind in
Yeah,
this day
yeah,
and age, you know?
it is pretty surprising. But I've definitely spoken to a number of people, and it sounds like it's not that unusual. Um, I would also say I'm a bit surprised that there are so many, not to disparage, but there are a lot of therapists who say that they have seen people with OCD, but I'm not sure that they understand the full extent of what it is and how to best treat it. Um, so I found, honestly, I feel quite lucky that I found that therapist that was able to really help me work through it.
Yeah, I do as well, because mine was, I've had it for 62 years. So to be able to find someone 30 years ago that was as good as she was
Yeah,
kind of amazing. Yeah, so what you're saying is, this is one of the reasons why I don't have professionals on this channel, because they all disagree with
mm,
how to diagnose, how to treat, and I think it becomes confusing to listeners. And so that's why I just want to have people's stories so that they can feel that they can relate to someone and not feel so alone.
yeah,
So,
yeah. Certainly, like in retrospect, I was clearly looking for reassurance. When I was having a tough time, there were days I remember I would just call my mom and just tell her how anxious I'm feeling, and she would tell me like everything is okay. And in retrospect, that was just reassurance. I was just looking for reassurance. And of course, that just makes it worse, right? So I think the therapist did the same. Like to some degree, I was kind of so worried about things and so anxious, and maybe I'm downplaying a little bit, but when I say I was anxious, like I legitimately was thinking about, just worried every second of the day. It just completely enveloped everything that I was trying to do. I couldn't work. I was not productive. Like it, it dramatically impacted my life. And those therapists who didn't understand OCD were also providing me reassurance in some way. So again, yeah, I was lucky. I was fortunate enough to find a therapist who identified the OCD, and I didn't like him at first because, he didn't provide me that reassurance.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, I'm not feeling that much better now. So I thought, no way. But it was extremely helpful. I mean, I can share a little bit about my subtype, which is self-harm. And the interesting thing with OCD is your fears sort of, in my experience, stem from the things you value the most. And for me, it's living a beautiful life and having a meaningful life and having purpose. And so, of course, my subtype was about whether I would live or die, and just found myself in situations, if I'm, near a balcony, just thinking, oh my God, what if I just jumped over this balcony and I killed myself? Or, I spent, I think, 2 to 3 weeks avoiding trains because I was so afraid that somehow I was going to just jump in front of a train. And so I took taxis everywhere. And, I think an ordinary therapist who is not necessarily so keen in understanding OCD would have just tried to reassure me that, it's going to be okay. And they probably would have seen that as a sign of just, legitimate self-harm, but it wasn't. It was truly the fear of that outcome, which he knew so well. So he told me things that that were very counterintuitive. When I told him about the train situation, he said, well, okay, if you're truly afraid of killing yourself, then you do realize you could just jump in front of a bus, right? And it's very counterintuitive, but the truth is he was right. It wasn't about that I wanted to kill myself. It was the fact that I had this fear about it, and like it was an irrational fear. And if it did stem from me actually truly wanting to off myself, then he was right. It would mean that I could have just jumped in front of a bus or done something else. And I think it was moments like that where it really helped me understand my OCD, and really have come a long way since then. So I'm very appreciative of the work we've done together.
So I'm assuming you got back on the train, right?
Yes. Yeah.
How did you get to that point? 3 weeks later, a month later?
Yeah. I think there's many parts to treating OCD properly. There's, therapy, again, I think with the right therapist is crucial. Just general awareness, I think, is so important to understand what your compulsions are. And I think for me also, I had no physical compulsions, right? They're all mental compulsions. If, the term is pure O. it made it more difficult for me to acknowledge that I even had OCD. I actually told my therapist it was the first, I think, 3 months working together. No, I don't have OCD. I don't wash my hands 20 times a day. Um, which is, I think, just the classic misunderstanding. Like, people just see it as either you're a perfectionist or you wash your hands a bunch of times from, the Aviator movie with, what's his name?
Leonardo DiCaprio?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's what everyone thinks about OCD. And that was my perception of it too. So I told him for months, I was like, I don't have OCD. I don't have OCD. And eventually I kind of got to the point where I accepted the fact that I do. But yes, so treating OCD, I think there was a number of things. Like I said, yeah, therapy was incredibly helpful, providing me that level of awareness. I did try several different medications. Some of them really were no help at all until I found one, I think, that was helpful. And yeah, mindfulness helps to some degree. I think, meditation is helpful, just in the sense that you can understand what mental rituals you're doing in your own mind and what compulsions you have. So that was certainly helpful for me as well. I'd also just say, a good routine is helpful. Just getting enough sleep, of course. There's studies that show the relationship between bad sleep habits and depression and anxiety. So that was clearly a factor. So yeah, just having a good routine, making sure you're eating right. I exercise quite a bit, so that definitely helps me as well. Just feeling my endorphins get to a good place and feeling good about myself in that way. So I think, yeah, just sort of a combination of all of those. And of course, I think a very critical part is exposure and response prevention therapy. So, as someone with OCD, it's very natural to try to avoid the thing you fear. And we play these mind games where we're trying to tell ourselves we're a good person or we don't actually think this. And of course, that's exactly what OCD wants you to do, and it only makes it worse. So it's very counterintuitive to think, why don't I just expose myself to my deepest fear over and over and over again and increase my anxiety intentionally? But I found that it really works. It really does. Being able to expose yourself and habituate to that anxiety and letting your body kind of come down after that by just repeatedly exposing yourself is tremendously helpful. It has helped me in times of high stress, but the other way it's helpful is just actually reflecting upon after I go through some exposure exercises. I usually do have some realizations. I can reflect upon, what it is to have OCD and what are my fears and how, like, truly those fears are just fears. And sometimes I realize how ridiculous OCD thoughts are. So yeah, I would say that has played a big part for me as well.
A lot of things that I read on the boards, people are afraid to start ERP. They're just so afraid to start because they're just going to be miserable. And what would you say to those people? I mean, it's worth it, right? It's
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
how do you start? There are so many people that know it's there, know they can, they have the opportunity, but they're afraid.
Yeah. Um,
Did, did,
Part of it, yeah, I definitely had. I'm trying to remember when I first did it.
you said
Um,
earlier that you wanted to talk about some of your fears.
mm,
So,
yeah. So I've spoken to a number of people with OCD, and it has become very apparent to me again that um, the things we fear the most are the things that we actually value the most and love. And so, um, for me, I I believe I'm a very curious individual and really value learning and understanding the world around me and um, trying to grow and educate myself. And um, so one of my fears was just really around not having a successful life and a successful career. And um, that was one sort of theme I think I had for myself. Um, and yeah, I guess self harm was another one, which sort of kind of worked in the same way in that I was afraid that things would not turn out the way that I wanted. Um, Another one I think for me was just relationship OCD. Um, Relationships are just so important, I think, in life and establishing relationships with your friends and your family and loved ones and your partners. And it sort of developed into obsessing over whether things were correct, um, whether they were heading in the right direction or whether they were the way that I wanted them to be. Um, Now I think having better understood OCD, I would say the metaphor for me is like somebody who might have contamination OCD who has a fear and then washes their hands, to rid that fear. Um, I feel like the mental rituals I had to do um, were sort of like washing my brain of the fear. Um, yeah, it was very similar. It's just like drawing or just you know comparing against somebody with perfectionism. It's similar in the sense that I just felt like it needed to be perfect, which in the real world that's just impossible, right? Like we can't have everything exactly the way we want, and it's never going to be that way. And part of the challenge with OCD is it's accepting that uncertainty because we can't control everything in our life. So um, yeah, I did read a lot of books on OCD just to understand what it was like. And I actually found it was quite useful to read how therapists treat and diagnose OCD, just because, um, at least for me, I like to see sort of like the thinking around what OCD is, and helps me be more aware of what it is in my own head. So,
anything else you want to talk about? I find it interesting that, well, at the very beginning you talked about having a twin,
mhm.
and so you were together all that time until you were like 22, like
Yeah,
in the same
hmm
city, same home.
yeah.
That must have just been extremely hard. Do you think that kind of started the ball rolling, or did you have any symptoms when you were younger that you can remember? Or this just came out of the blue?
Yeah. I mean, I certainly think it was a contributing factor. Um, there were some small signs when we were growing up. I remember, I think we were 12 or 13 years old, and um, we would argue all the time. You know, as a twin, of course, if you spend 24 hours a day with somebody, you're bound to get on each other's nerves, especially as siblings. So we did go to therapy for that for a little bit. And I do remember there were some discussions around how we had to do like the same things. And I'll give you some minor examples. If I touched my brother, he would have to touch me back. Uh, and I think for him, maybe it was like feeling like there needed to be like a balance. But there was, I think maybe it was, yeah, it was a bit of a sign, I think, of early OCD. And I'm just trying to think of other examples. It would just be so stupid in retrospect. It was like I picked up something and then he had to pick it up, or you know, I touched the car first, or he had to touch it at the exact same time. Um, and I guess it slipped away. I didn't ever think about it for, it must have been a decade or something after that until I actually even thought about the fact that I had OCD. Um, the surprising thing actually was, after those 3 years and I finally got diagnosed, he, I was like, oh, I have OCD. Like, did you, it's a genetic thing as well as environmental. And so I asked him, I said, I have OCD. Do you have OCD? Like, is it just me? And he was like, no, I have OCD. And I was shocked. I mean, I thought he would have mentioned it, but maybe it's just it's just a part of OCD, or it's so well hidden. And I think this is why it's so easy to misdiagnose, because there's so much shame around it. And I think people tend to blame themselves and think that, am I crazy? Is there something wrong with me? When again, really, it's just thoughts that pop up in our mind that we obsess about, which creates these never-ending cycles, right? So,
Well, and that's the thing. When you have pure O, it's a lot harder to diagnose because the person has to be completely honest with and say what they're thinking. I mean, a therapist can't get in your head and see what you're thinking. You have to actually tell them.
yeah,
It's not like you can see somebody washing their hands 30 times a day. It's not the same
right,
thing.
right,
And I
exactly,
think that's why over 30 years ago, I wasn't diagnosed, because at that time, I was not really performing rituals. They were all in my head.
right,
And and you were talking about The Aviator. Back then it was the movie How Good Does It Get, or whatever, that movie
mm-hmm.
with Jack Nicholson.
Yeah,
As Good as It Gets. That was the movie. Uh that's how you were determined whether you were OCD or not. You were locking your doors and tapping things. And
right,
so
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
glad
It's certainly,
I'm glad you finally found someone. And are you still in therapy to this day, or are you taking a break, or?
I am, yeah. I find it incredibly useful just to be able to. I'm still learning things all the time, so I don't. Maybe at some point I would consider not being in therapy, but I think everyone could probably use therapy and everyone could benefit from therapy. So, um, yeah, I just think that there's so much to learn and so much to think through. So I definitely value it still, for sure.
Mhm. You have something really exciting to talk about in a few minutes about your new venture coming up. that has to do with OCD. But before we talk about that, Zach, I just wanted to ask you a little bit about social situations right now. Do you, I mean, I'm kind of assuming now that you're doing this venture, but do people
Mhm.
know? Do your friends know? Does your family know? How does all that work with you?
Yeah. Yeah, most people in my life know. I don't try to hide it uh, anymore. Um,
But you did for a while.
well, there's certainly some nuance to it. I don't think I'm going to be sharing exactly every thought that I have at every moment with
Right.
people. Um, but to some degree, I think they know that I have OCD, which you know I would still say people have different understandings of what it is. Um, and maybe to some degree, people who don't have OCD will never understand really what it is. Um, but at the very least, I think they can understand somewhat what I'm going through, which is helpful and hopefully to help me potentially break cycles in the future.
Hmm.
Um, but I mean, yeah, I was at a brunch the other week, and certain obsessions started to pop up, and I'm not necessarily sharing every obsession that I have at a meal with five friends. So, um, to some degree, you know, people aren't going to know everything for sure.
Hmm. Okay. Well, is there anything else you want to talk about your story before we move on to the next segment, or anything that we've left out? Or
I think what's hard about OCD is, the nickname for it is the doubting disease,
Mhm.
and you just tend to doubt so much. And for me, that was doubting whether I even had OCD. For me, that was doubting what was effective in my treatments. It was doubting my therapist. It was doubting, yeah, I mean, whether ERP was helping. There were so many doubts along the way. And I think for someone with OCD, it's never entirely clear. And it's hard, I think, to differentiate an OCD thought from, I suppose, just a non OCD thought. That really is the crux of the problem, is trying to figure out what is just something that your OCD wants you to think about versus something that is okay to actually think through and analyze and not obsess over. Um, yeah, I think it's just it's hard to have OCD, and I guess I just want to empathize with other people that who are listening that do have OCD, and I don't want to provide them reassurance. um, but having a level of awareness has certainly helped, and um, reading about it and understanding it has certainly helped. And to some degree, I can go about my days and have more confidence and not have to doubt everything. Which um, just want to share that you can get there just understanding how your OCD works.
yeah, for me, it's like when you were talking about the doubting. To me, it's like paralyzing. It's like you can't move forward because there's this thought, and you've got to figure out, is this real? Is this not real? And then once you figure that out, you try to move forward again, and then you got another one. And it's just like it's paralyzing, you
Yeah.
know, and or it can be paralyzing. It doesn't have to be, but um, without treatment, it's like you don't ever get anywhere. You're just
Yep.
paddling water. And I've always described that on my channel that my OCD right now is it's like a translucent curtain in front of me. It's just right there. I have to look through it. It's still there. I still see it, but I have to
Mm.
look through it to see the outside world.
Mm.
And before it was just a dark curtain. I couldn't get past it. I couldn't experience what everybody else was experiencing because it was just blocking everything.
Yeah.
So you can't deny it's there. You can't ignore it because it just comes back even stronger, you know. And I think that's scary because you're like you have to watch it, you have to see it, you have to yeah, you do. It is scary, but once you do it over and over and over again, it becomes easier.
Yep.
And so, why don't we go ahead and talk about your new venture? I'm really excited about this. I think this can help a lot of people.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm pretty excited about it too. Um, having gone through my whole experience, I have felt that I've learned so many things along the way, and I wanted to help others in whatever way I can. So, been helping people find OCD resources, and also built out an application that helps people go through ERP exercises and guides them through. So, if people want to reach out and want to try the application, they can send me an email, which sounds like you're going to put in the link below. Or if they want help finding an OCD specialist therapist, I've helped other people find that as well. Just, as I mentioned, sometimes there's a lot of therapists that say they have treated someone with OCD, but that, in my opinion, does not necessarily make them a specialist in understanding it. So, been able to help some folks just find someone that's helpful, or just to chat about OCD. I'm happy to chat with people.
Does this app have a name yet?
Yeah.
Or,
Well, it's called Mango Health, but we'll see if that sticks. But that's what it
okay.
is, like the fruit. The fruit.
Uh-huh.
Yep.
And so is it going to be available on iOS and Android?
So right now it's just it's a web application. You just go on a URL, which I can share the link.
Uh-huh.
But we're certainly improving it. We're certainly trying to make it better every day. And like I said, my background is in computer science, so I'm constantly workshopping with people and figuring out what's good and what
Mm-hmm.
how it can continue to improve and be helpful. So.
Mm-hmm. So like the ERP part, you just go in and you put in like I don't understand what it does.
Sure. Happy to explain. So, I've done this so many times on pen and paper or just on my phone on my notes app where I just kind of write down what fear I'm currently trying to focus on. I try to remind myself what compulsions are associated with that fear to, actively not necessarily do those compulsions.
Mm-hmm.
And I, there's a number of different ways you can expose yourself. There's a number of different techniques, right? You can write a script of what your fears are and repeat that back to yourself over and over again. You can read articles about your fear. You can watch videos that have your fear in it. So there's certainly a number of different ways, but right now it's chat to discuss kind of what those fears are and to write them out. And then to just, repeat that back to yourself over and over again for, let's say, 10 minutes, if you need more or less. Sort of just depends, again, if you're doing exposure therapy, how long you want to do it for until you feel your anxiety has first increased, right? Because we're intentionally trying to induce our own anxiety. But then, at a certain point, right, that anxiety starts to come down, and we continue to repeat that back to ourselves until we get to a point where we can move on with our day. So just walking through and guiding people through doing that exercise and just helping them through that. Now, there's many other components to this, which I like to continue to build out, but being able to establish your fear hierarchy, right? Sometimes we want to focus on specific subtypes that are more forefront in our mind. I think just being very aware of what our compulsions are and being mindful of not necessarily doing those compulsions would be extremely useful as well, which I want to continue working on that as well. A couple other things, can't think off the top of my head, but we're certainly continuing to work on improving it.
Okay, so can they reach you at the email address that I have for you? Is that the best?
Yeah, you can share. So it's Zach at themangohealth.com. So ZACH at the THE and then mango like the fruit health.com.
Okay, so I think this would be really helpful to people who, I don't know, are you charging for this or is this free?
I think at some point we're gonna probably try to see about a subscription, but for right now we're just trialing and learning about what is useful and what's not. So people can reach out and we can offer for free.
Okay, so I think this would be really helpful for people who, several people I've talked to this past year have not been able to get into ERP therapy for financial reasons, insurance reasons. This might be helpful to people like that and help people who just don't want to do it with someone else. They want to do it on their own, kind of have that control. And I can see this will be very useful, Zach.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it. I hope so too. I hope we can help as many people as possible. So, and
then how does the other work? You said you help find resources. Is that on the same app?
It's not on the app. It's just me and
okay.
I am working with a friend on this, and so when people do reach out, we want to be as helpful as we can. And if they're having trouble finding an OCD specialist, we've helped a number of different individuals. So
that's awesome.
Really, if they have any OCD questions, we can try to help.
That's awesome. Zach, do you have any words of wisdom to leave the listeners of this podcast before we go?
Yeah. So the question around OCD is, can you accept uncertainty in your life? And once you can truly accept uncertainty, you feel much more liberated. If you can accept the uncertainty to the point where you trust your future self, I guess is a good question to ask, because once you can believe that your future self will make the right decision, you start to feel more confident. And it's a bit cyclical. So the more trust you have for your future self, the less your OCD gets in the way. So
absolutely. Do you feel like you're doing that now?
Yeah. It's about, again, accepting that uncertainty, and it's having that deep trust for yourself, that no matter what happens, you are still you, and not to fear that future potential thing, because your future self will be able to handle it. So.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that. And thank you again for joining me today. And you're always welcome to come back if you ever want to talk about another topic. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
You're very welcome. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation with Zachary Gittelman and that it helped you feel less alone. I also hope you will check out Zachary's website, themangohealth.com, where you will find assistance in finding helpful resources and assistance with self-guided ERP therapy. Don't forget that this podcast has a Facebook group with the same name. We are a small group, but we are hoping to grow. We're there to support you in any struggles you are having. Also, if you or someone you know would like to be a guest on this podcast, please contact me at any of my social media links below. The only criteria is that you have been diagnosed and treated for OCD. Remember, although OCD cannot be cured, it can be managed, and I am living proof of that. Please join me Thursday morning for this week's midweek motivation and another full episode next Monday morning on Around and Around the OCD Circle. Have a great week.